Some people are like bees to a honeypot. You know who they are, especially if you ever held a garage sale on a Saturday morning. Hello, I'm Mike Bain from Christian Voice New Zealand. Now, the Collins English Dictionary's definition of the phrase is if something attracts people like bees to a honeypot or like bees round a honeypot, it attracts people in large numbers. You know, it's an expression, though, which is being used to describe reaction to the current Middle East conflict between Israel and Palestine. When the conflict first hit the headlines, there was an outpouring of both rage and condemnation over the attack on Israel by the terrorist group Hamas. I call them terrorists because anyone who launches attacks on civilians and slaughters children, they're terrorists. However, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I accept one man's freedom fighter as another man's terrorist. Just depends on what side of the gun that you're on. And I'll restate what I said last time. As a Christian, I'm saddened to see this conflict affecting innocent lives on both sides. And while as a Christian, I look to the land of Israel as being holy, but then so does Islam, which shows you really there's no side to be taken. But like bees to a honeypot, we're attracted to the conflict. We have an opinion formed on what I consider to be an unconscious bias brought about by our own upbringing. As a journalist and as a person who's been and seen a lot of trouble over the years, we'll often see attitudes shift in a conflict. Unquestionably, the recent terrorist attacks on Israeli people by Hamas fighters were brutal and evil. The attacks reflected Palestinian bitterness about decades of conflict and a rejection by some of the very existence of Israel. But morally, such a massacre can never be justified. The decision of Israel to invade Gaza and destroy Hamas is understandable, but fraught with considerable danger. Such an incursion will inevitably lead to a huge loss of life. Many have already died, and whatever the rights or wrongs, Palestinian and international Muslim outrage will only be compounded. Yep, just like the bees to a honeypot, it's not just countries though, but anybody who's anybody is out supporting Palestine, and yet you'd think it was Israel who started this conflict. So speak support about Israel and watch the venom pour out from those anti-Semitic mouths. Yeah, the lacklustre response from our foreign minister over the conflict saw Prime Minister Chris Hipkins walk back and toughen up the condemnation. New Zealand, by the way, has given millions of dollars in financial support to the Palestinians for efforts to establish a homeland in the past. And you can bet some of those dollars have found their way to Hamas. And no one should be surprised that these three members of the Green Party, and two unrecently were part of the government, have supported the actions of Hamas. Yep, that's correct. They've supported the abduction, the killing of Israeli children and adults. Shame on them. And there's also the usual sporting star, Sonny Bill Williams, putting his head above the parapet. Oddly enough, the only person you would expect to have a say would have been St. Jacinda, but she hasn't. But isn't it sad how the Auckland Museum, in showing solidarity in support of the victims of Israel by lighting its building in Israeli colours, had to apologise for the offence caused to Palestinian supporters? And yet we don't see any building being lit up in Palestinian colours. I guess the flavour isn't what the bees who attend the Islamic mosques in this country is not to their taste, as we don't hear them condemning terrorism at the hands of Hamas, especially as how they themselves had been victims of terrorism recently. Like bees to a honeypot, Palestinian supporters shut out a show of solidarity and grieving from the Jewish community in Australia, and the Jews had to listen to a group chanting, "Gas the Jews." Around the world, we're watching an outpouring of anti-Semitic hate, a vitriol from nearly every land. You know, just last week I found out that climate change must have been involved in the Middle Eastern conflict, as Greta Looney Tunes' voice has been heard in support of Palestinian advocating the use of sustainable bombs. Yes, you heard me. Like bees attracted to a honeypot, they're unstoppable. It's a bit of an eye-opener, though, especially when one black guy dies in America and the world breaks out into mass protests, cities burn, and anyone in the public eye desperately looks to bend a knee for a cheap photo opportunity in mock solidarity. You know, 1,400 Jews were slaughtered, and the same people are out on the streets calling for the annihilation of Israel and the Jewish people. Meanwhile, the celebrities, politicians and sportsmen who can't wait to jump on every other tragedy remain silent. Certainly has been an eye-opener. Now, there's plenty of information available online about the history of Palestine and Israel, but one thing I found interesting was how the land was left barren and desolate until the Jews came back to the land in the mid-1800s and the land became refreshed with water and began to be fertile again. Now, some may say it's coincidence, but others may have a differing opinion. But the land given to the descendants of Abraham was described as a land of milk and honey. And doesn't it seem strange to you that everyone is like a bee attracted to this honeypot? I've recently seen other bees attracted to the honeypot of prophecy. Some claiming this is the start of World War III. Could be, but it could also be the start of something even bigger. And that's the battle foretold in the book of Revelation. You know, Jesus' words recorded in Matthew 24:43, if you knew a thief was coming, you'd stay awake, stay on the watch, as the Apostle Paul put it. You know, if you want a clearer understanding of the times that we live in, then I suggest you find all the honey that's in the pot called the Bible. And be like a bee, be attracted to the God of heaven and earth. We, New Zealand, cannot nor should it support the killing of innocents. We cannot nor should we be like the nation of Germany did in the days of Adolf Hitler, enter or support acts of anti-Semitic behaviour towards the Jewish people. And we cannot nor should we have members of our House of Representatives support ethnic cleansing of one nation. You know, in an article last week, I read the story of a chicken farmer who's based in Lebanon. He wanted Israel to attack his country. I know. He wanted rid of the scourge of Hezbollah, who overran his country more than a decade ago. So not every Arab wants to see conflict, but they certainly are, and unquestionably are attracted to the honeypot of Israel. You know, I've heard calls for prayer. So yes, we should be praying for those on both sides who mourn, or who are wounded or homeless, or who now live in great fear. We should pray for the vulnerable minority of Palestinians who are Christian, pray for inspired and gifted peacemakers, for the general de-escalation, for a ceasefire, and for a negotiated settlement. Pray for a deeper miracle, for a new desire among Jews and Arabs to live alongside each other, not in hatred and violence, but with generosity, justice, mercy and respect. Pray that large numbers of Jews and Palestinians may come to believe in Christ, and so find peace with God and a growing peace with others. Pray for God's sovereign purposes to be fulfilled across the world, and that God's kingdom may come. And just one last thing, one last bit of advice. Look up, for your redemption is near.